In our work, we investigate the delayed and indirect impact of link recommendation algorithms on social networks. This is joint work with Zhang, Shangen Lu, and Yixin Wang. Recommendation systems often focus on user content interactions. Studying the impact of this system has received a lot of recent research interest. However, a less explored area is social, user-to-user recommendations, where users and not content are suggested to each other as recommendations. Such social recommendations are ubiquitous on platforms like Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn. A significant part of the connections are algorithmically curated. Despite the ubiquity and relevance, studies that aim to understand the impacts of link recommendation algorithms face many challenges, since measuring causal effects requires comparing the counterfactual evolution of the network without and with recommendations. Without interventional access, the most prevalent approach is to use historical data and perform longitudinal studies. However, longitudinal studies lack natural growth counterfactuals, so the causal effect is typically measured with respect to pre-intervention networks. This estimation can potentially under or overestimate the true causal effect, depending on the temporal trends in the unobserved natural growth counterfactual. On the other hand, interventional access offers the opportunity to perform A/B studies where some users receive and others do not receive recommendations. These studies are considered to be industry standard for measuring causal effects. However, they are not a panacea for lack of appropriate controls, because both the evolution of control and the treatment group are biased due to network interference. In our work, we're studying impacts of recommendation through simulation. We propose a dynamic social network that captures the feedback loop between natural evolution and algorithmic growth. Through the simulation, we find that link recommendations have surprising delayed and indirect effects. Finally, this allows us to articulate the evaluation biases of longitudinal and A/B studies. In our work, we propose an extension of the Jackson-Rogers network evolution model composed of two parts, the natural growth and algorithmic growth. In a natural growth, at each time step, a new node I arrives with a latent embedding sampled from a group conditional distribution. Upon arrival, the first phase of natural growth consists of meeting strangers. Here, the new node connects with strangers based on latent space affinity. The second phase of natural growth is meeting friends. In this phase, the new node connects to neighbors of neighbors with constant probability. Further, at each time step, in the algorithmic growth part of the network evolution, a subset of nodes receive suggestions according to a link recommendation algorithm. And a subset of these recommendations are added to the network. To illustrate the evaluation challenges, we focus on stylized settings and consider two types of link recommendation algorithms. First are neighborhood-based, where for a given active node in the network, the recommender selects among candidate nodes a distance 2 from the active node. Second, we consider affinity-based recommendations, where recommendations are selected with probability based on latent embedding similarity. Further, for evaluating the impact of these algorithmic interventions in networks, we consider several metrics, such as the Gini coefficient. This metric measures the inequality in the degree distribution of nodes. Another metric we consider is homophily, which captures the preference for within-group connections. Now we show some stylized findings. We first examine delayed impacts on inequality. Recall that high Gini coefficients mean high inequality. And we see that inequality slightly rises naturally in the natural growth process. When we add recommendations based on latent space similarity, we find that the recommendations exacerbate inequality over time, even as compared to natural growth. This disparity arises from nodes with high embedding norm having more visibility and being recommended more often. Friend-of-friend suggestions seem to boost inequality as well, as shown here by the rising blue line. Interestingly, when compared to natural growth, these suggestions actually decrease inequality, at least in the short term. Hence, we can see that without a baseline of natural growth, longitudinal studies could yield qualitatively wrong conclusions. Furthermore, we see that recommendations have surprising delayed effects after recommendations are stopped. Here, after time step 200, when recommendations stop, actually inequality spikes, particularly for the friend-of-friend recommender. The reason for this is that the network got denser when we added algorithmic connections. However, now newer nodes arriving later miss out on this benefit. So the once growing subset of rich nodes shrinks as the network increases in size, leading to increases in relative inequality as measured by the Gini coefficient. Now we will consider indirect impacts. We can split total effects into direct and indirect effects. Direct effects show how by adding algorithmic connections, we impact the network, and indirect effects reveal how recommendations shape the future natural growth process. In our model, indirect effects come from mediated edges. Here's an example. Imagine a network at time t, which has AB edge from a previous recommendation. At the current time step, a new node arrives, node E, and during the meeting strangers phase, E connects to A. If in the meeting friends phase, E connects to B, we call this edge a mediated edge because otherwise, without the presence of the recommended edge AB, the node B would not be a feasible connection. So the edge EB is an indirect impact of recommendations. Such mediated edges are prevalent, and we see that their prevalence increases over time, and they are persistent even after recommendations stop. Besides being prevalent and persistent, they're also biased. We see that edges mediated by friend-of-friend recommendations tend to be biased in favor of bichromatic connections, while latent recommendations based on latent similarity tend to be biased towards monochromatic edges. So these have been just some small illustrative examples of various evaluation biases. We invite you to read our paper for a thorough discussion of other variants of network dynamics and a thorough discussion of the evaluation biases in A/B studies. Finally, there are many exciting directions for future research, including theoretical formalizations, extensions to opinion dynamics, as well as developing methodology for debiasing evaluation in dynamic networks. Thank you.